Hi, my name's Dan, and today I thought I'd do a video on donations. So this video is really targeted at open source authors that are maybe thinking about going down the route of donations, or maybe have even started trying to accept donations and wondering what they could maybe do better or what's going wrong. And this isn't going to be a full guide or anything. So first I'm going to give some general high-level advice, just to create some perspective about what I think works well with donations and why they might be difficult. And then after that I'm going to dig into my own experience and journey of handling donations and sponsorships within the context of my own project, BookStack. And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to essentially lump donations and sponsorships into one bucket, since they are essentially the same thing as people giving you money for very little in return. I know with sponsorships maybe there's some like advertising component, but there's a lot of overlap in these two things, so I'm just going to lump them together. So, donations and open source. Based upon what I see, I think a lot of open source authors are quite optimistic when it comes to donations, at least in regard to the high-level theory. And this is probably because a lot of developers in open source are quite technical focused. They're focused on the code, the mechanics, rather than the social skills and the social elements that may be needed with open source maintainership and project management in general. So I think it's easy to have the notion that if you build something great, then people will contribute to that. They will donate because of how awesome a project is, because of how great it's built, because of how wonderful the code is. And this may be the case in some cases, especially where it's a more technical project where it's being used directly by developers, where you're giving them a nice experience. These things can have an impact. But ultimately, I don't think that's a primary driver at all, and it's kind of a misconception that I see a lot of people go into the world of open source and donations with. Because really, in my view, it comes down to audience building. Now, if you haven't got an audience, then you haven't got people that are going to look through code or find the project and think it's awesome and donate to you. I think that's a key part that people miss out, and that's a part with open source projects in general, is the audience building element. It's a very social part rather than the technical part, so it's quite easy to miss, and it's probably also the part that sinks a lot of open source projects as well, because if nobody comes across it, if no one sees your project, then no one's going to use it, no one's going to donate to it. So it's a really hard graft just trying to get donations from nothing. I think most areas where I see donations succeed is where there's already an existing audience, an existing community built up, or maybe someone's transitioned from something else, so they've been sharing their story over time, building something, and then they've got a community they're ready to market to once they've released something. Or maybe they've gone from one project where they had an existing community to another, or maybe the project is backed by an organization that's already popular from something else, so they've already got an existing community that they can shout out to, that they can communicate to. I think this is the real key component that you really need to think about if you are going to go down this route. It's not just about the technical part, it's a much more social thing than that. So I would maybe think to yourself, have you ever just donated to code? I've donated quite a lot in open source, but I don't really see myself donating to code bases, to general projects. Like, for someone to donate, there's got to be that action, that thought process, because there is that kind of almost physical barrier that the user has to action that. They might seek out your project out of their own need, but there may not be anywhere along that journey where they need to donate. And it's very easy to then use a project and then not think about donations. So even your existing users that are using your software may not think to come back and donate. You got to think about, okay, who can I get this message out to, and how can I put even just that thought of maybe donating across to that audience. So you do go into kind of realm of marketing here, and it is distinct, it's a different thing, but it's definitely an element to be aware of as you build up a project. People don't donate to code, they donate to other people, they donate to people and their stories. It's a much more powerful thing to say, look at my journey and how I've come here, and receiving donations will be able to let me carry this on or take it to the next level. That's a much better story than saying, look how well these functions are written, aren't they worth paying for? You know, and it might help to like flip this around to think about, when have you donated, if you have donated to open source? What has triggered that process to even think about donating? A good but quite blatant example that really made me think about this initially is Elementary OS, so a Linux distribution, and it's fully open source and free. But right here on the homepage, they've got this kind of call to action, pay what you can, where you have to think about how much you want to pay for the software. You can see there's no free option here. It says purchase Elementary OS, but you can go to custom and then just put a 0 in there, or you can get it from other sources because it's free software and openly distributed. And this was quite controversial, I remember, at the time when they implemented this, but I think it's really quite clever and quite good because it really makes the user think on their journey about paying for the efforts that are behind the project. But this is just one example, and there are many ways to approach this. It could go from something like this, or it could just be a link on your project. And just as another example, the KDE project, who makes a lot of software that a lot of people rely on and are a project that really depends upon donations, they added a simple, just once a year dismissible notifications, so really not that intrusive to users, just to kind of trigger that process, to trigger that thought about donating to them, where users wouldn't usually see that within their day-to-day path. And looking at this chart, can you tell when they enabled that? So it's once a year starting on December. And I think they might have done some other donation drive stuff around this time, but this kind of thing clearly works. So it is kind of almost like they need that combination of both. You need a big audience with the potential to donate. That's your potential donation pot. And then you also need some way to put that thought into people's minds. Just something to trigger the action which a user would have to do to donate in the first place. So yeah, those are my general high-level thoughts. I don't want to go too deep into it because there's so many different methods and ways that this can be done. As I said, I'm going to now go into my own experiences and my own journey to provide an example of what I've done, how I've gone about it, and what works and what doesn't. So my project is BookStack, an open source documentation system, and I started this in 2015. So these are just a couple of my charts that I use for tracking issues and things like that. So yeah, I started this way back in 2015. So coming up to the 10-year mark for the project. And initially, I did not want to get money involved with the project at all. In my view, it would just complicate things. I didn't particularly need it because I hadn't, well, at that time, wasn't too well paying. But I wasn't doing bad, but I didn't think, chasing money via the open source project was going to be worth it too much because I thought it'd be a lot of work. And also it would take away from enjoying the project as well. It now turns it into a business, especially if you begin to rely on that money. And I'm quite happy that I didn't go after donations or sponsorships or anything like that at that stage, because I think in those early days, it would have been very difficult. I had very little audience, so I think it would have been very stressful at that time. So in 2020, so we're talking about 5 years into the project, my view on this changed a little bit because I was getting more offers for donations and sponsorships, and sometimes they'd be from businesses that would be able to provide a little bit more. And by this point, I had a pretty good insight into how much effort it is to maintain an open source project and how much it is to keep it going. So at this point, I still didn't need the money, and I still didn't really want to take the money for myself, especially as I was quite well paid at this point, relative to my location and age. But I thought it could be useful to take those donations and then use them as a basis to forward on to projects that the BookStack depends upon, just as a way to support the foundation in which we sit upon. So that was the initial basis for accepting donations, and I did that through GitHub sponsors just because that was the easiest at the time. And as they were coming in, then I would select some of my dependencies, trying to get a good range, and then forward on donations. And something that I should admit that at this time in 2020, this was probably when I was initially having second thoughts about my job that I had at the time. And then it was around sort of mid-2021, say May or June, that I finally kind of handed in my notice at my job, with my leaving day being, the last day of September of that year. But yeah, at this point, I put a pause on forwarding in donations with a thought process of being able to use those to support me. I didn't remove those donations that I was forwarding on. I kept them going, but I just paused the forwarding on of new donations just so they could build up as a potential pot for me to sustain myself on, just as an experiment during the 6 months to see how possible things would be. And looking back at my blog post that I've made at the end of 2021, you can see it's around the $500 mark, which was a pretty good boost. And I think that helped by announcing my change to work on the BookStack project full time, and also set up these company level sponsorship tiers, which again I'll show later in my GitHub sponsors, where these will provide just basic logos provided on our project README and the homepage, and that's all that gets from return. And then over time, these donations have built up, and so this chart showing the income for 2024 includes donations. It also includes support services, which are the yellow bars. So ignoring the yellow bars, these reflect a monthly average of about £1,400 per month. But these have been increasing over time still. But I'd say it was probably a bit of a curve. So it went quite high initially, as I was initially advertising and launching. They were taking sponsorships and donations and things like that. And then I'm working on the project full time. And then the acceleration of that has kind of leveled off, which totally makes sense because by that 2021 point where I left my job, that was 6 years into the project. So by this time I had a good sized community built up across many locations, across the Discord, across Reddit, across those that had just watched the blog and get the email newsletters. So by this time there was that big potential. So a lot of that community will see these initial posts and donate at that stage. And that figure is something to note as well at this time. 1,400 per month is probably just about livable. So that's before taxes and everything. I could probably just about live upon that, but it is quite low. So that's about the equivalent to about £17,000 a year. Again, I want to make it very clear that that's not a dig at this figure. I'm very grateful, and it's so amazing that I'm able to get this amount from people willing to donate and sponsor the project. But the reality of it is that, if that was your wage, 17,000 as a more senior developer, considering I left my job somewhere in the 50s, then that's quite a challenge to live upon. And I'm quite lucky that I've quite frugal living costs. But as reflected in these charts, something that I did in kind of early 2022 is that I started doing support services that have then really helped add to the amount of income that I'm getting for the project. But I won't dig into the support services side of that because that doesn't come under the scope of donations and sponsorships. Okay, so let's change gears to the technical setup. So how do I show and accept sponsorships and donations? So on the BookStack website, is one of the header options is kind of in support donate. And this is just a page which directly says about how we do accept sponsorships and donations. So here I've got GitHub sponsors and Ko-fi. And then below that, I just detail exactly what they're used for and just questions and common things that are asked about donations. As well as some terms. This is the newest bit that I recently added at the bottom just because I had some interesting scenarios. Like I had a company come to me that were offering me sponsorships on behalf of a gambling company. And that made me a bit worried because they could have just gone and donated right away and I'd feel like obligated to follow through on providing their advertising on our website. So I thought I kind of wanted an opt-out in case someone signs up to our company, with gambling or something worse, full-on porn on our homepage. I didn't really want that, or crypto or anything. So I thought I'd better add some terms just to ensure we retain a little bit of control when it comes to what we do provide, even though it's quite minimal. But the likely reality is that most people don't ever see this page, even those that do donate. But a large part of what I think works for me is being transparent about things. So putting out these blog posts with funding status. So I do a couple of these a year. I do like a mid-year one when it's the project's birthday essentially. And then I do the end of year ones looking back on the past year that are a bit more in depth, like this one here where I go into a monthly breakdown. And I think this is a good reminder to the audience that I have that we do accept donations and then we survive off of donations and sponsorships, well, at least at this stage. And of course, because I use GitHub sponsors, the option for using that shows up in quite a few areas. So it shows up at the top of the project here. It shows on the side here. And I think it may even sometimes show at the bottom of closed issues when you're having discussions with people, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. And then within the README for the project itself, where I show the sponsors that's provided by the tiers, I have links about where they can find more information, like the donations page I showed earlier, the GitHub sponsors page, and the Ko-fi page. And this is the same on the project homepage as well. So there's quite a few avenues where people can find out about donations, but I'm very much not pushy with it at all. I don't do much outbound display of it. I don't include it on every blog post and every email or every social post and things like that. It's very rare that I will outwardly request donations or put it past people, because the reality is that I am self-funding at this stage. I was losing money initially, and at the very start of that kind of 6-month trial that I mentioned earlier, my parents were helping me with my living costs. But at this point, a few years down the line, I am self-funding, so I don't specifically need it. It's not crucial to the project. It's not crucial to me. So I don't want to put pressure on people to give away their money. I'd prefer that to be much more natural. But I think I would be much more successful of this route if I did make that more prominent. Like the elementary example earlier, if I was a bit bolder with it, if I was a bit more marketing focused in other ways, because I'm really bad with marketing in general, then I think I could utilize that community, that audience much better. But I'm kind of happy about the kind of balance that I have, and that's always going to be a personal thing for you to think about in terms of how, I guess, pushy sounds bad, but how pushy you are with displaying donations. And of course, some people even show it within the application themselves. We saw the KDE example earlier. Some web software may have it in the corner at all times. There's a whole range. You just got to think about what's best for you on that scale of things. And another kind of natural source of donations that I just thought about is from supporting people. With this project, I do spend a significant amount of time supporting people within our communities on GitHub issues or our Discord server or Reddit, or even more recently through a whole series of YouTube videos. And I think by having that one-on-one discussion with someone, that connection, even if it's a video where they're still able to kind of see me and see that it's a person they're building. Going back to that original idea, people don't donate to code bases, they donate to people and their journeys and their stories. I think that really helps, because many a times I would have helped someone. You could spend hours helping someone, and then sometimes at the end it's not obligated at all. I don't ever ask for it, but then I'll see a donation come through from at the end of it because they're happy. Again, it's that action. It's not explicit. I haven't put something in front of them, but it's almost an implicit example of that. And it's hard to link all of those up. If I had to guess relative to the hours, it's probably not worth it if you thought of that as a salary or a wage for that support, but it was never asked for me. So everyone is very kind, and it all totals up into a bigger bucket. And then once you add in like the more corporate level sponsorships, and then in my case, I said earlier, the support services, it all comes together into something greater that does help support you. And one thing, just before we leave the topic of how donations display, I thought I should mention that I'm moving most of my projects and repos across to Codeberg. I've done it for most of my personal ones, and I've done it for all of my BookStack ones except for the main one, just because it's technically complicated. But one thing that I've noticed, I don't think Codeberg has the same kind of mechanisms. It doesn't have an official level donation and sponsor level offering, and that's fair. It's kind of outside the scope. But also, I don't think it's got the same mechanisms to be able to display donations and things within the platform itself. So in a scenario like this, you may have to be a bit more proactive with, displaying it maybe in your README, having badges or links and things, just to provide some kind of opportunity for users to come across that. Right, so now digging in a bit, my GitHub sponsors page is this one here. So one thing that you might notice is that it's very personal to me. So this isn't like the donation page for BookStack, this is a donation page for Dan Brown. And there's a couple of reasons that I've done it this way. So one of those is just simplicity, basically. So I just thought I'd set it up on the main account that I already had. And I didn't necessarily know where I was going to go with this, especially when I set more of a focus on it when I started to go through that 6-month trial period. I kind of kept that open as working on open source in general full time, and BookStack isn't my only project. I have various other little projects which then I could also use this same account for. So it's kind of practical in that regard, but that's very scenario dependent. If you already had like a project with a full team behind it, then a project level donation page may make a lot more sense in terms of management. But then the other side of this is that I think it helps to have things quite personal. Again, coming back to that original idea, people don't donate to code or even faceless projects, I don't think. They donate to the people behind those and their stories. So this is me. It's showing who's working on the project, who's going to benefit from the donations. And I think that, again, that personal connection there does help, because you're not sending money to kind of faceless corporation, a faceless logo. You're sending that money to help someone out. So I think that side of things does help. It might not be so scalable when I do have a team. There could still be ways to do that, which I've been thinking of. I'll still accept donations, much like I donate to other projects that I rely upon, which I should mention I have restarted again. I do now donate a lot more to those projects now I've got sustainable income. But you could maybe do the same for a team-based approach. So, I'd be the primary receiver of donations and then forward on a portion of those to people, essentially paying a wage based off of the donations that I get personally. And then down the side here, we can see how I have the donations set up. So I've left things fairly flexible, so you can choose a one-time donation of a custom amount, or you can choose a custom monthly amount. Otherwise, I have select tiers. So really, I just set up kind of a generic few initial ones, just with reasonably low amounts that people could be happy to donate to. And again, I didn't want to put any wording around these that kind of makes people feel bad if they didn't choose a higher tier. I just kept them quite generic, which is why I've just got coffee and snack and takeaway. But then below these, I have got these 3 extra tiers. So the bronze company tier, silver company tier, and gold company tier. Again, I put a company in there just so users don't feel like obliged or the need to donate at these higher amounts. Although you could say maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you think, if someone's donating on behalf of a company, they might feel obliged to specifically go at these donates. Maybe that's the effect a bit. And then all of these, in my case, they pretty much give you the exact same thing. So it's just the logo and link on the site homepage and the README, as I said earlier. And the only difference difference is the size and the label that they're under. So as we can look back on the homepage, the gold sponsor has a much larger logo, but that's all that's provided, so it's quite simple. And through GitHub, I've got some kind of automation off the back of these that when someone signs up to one of these, it will send them a response email asking them to confirm their logo and link that they want to show on the website. And also GitHub sponsors in general makes it very easy to manage. You get paid in a lump sum at the same point every month, and it's fairly painless to manage. There was a little bit of drama when they took away the option to donate via PayPal, because I think for a lot of people that removed a lot of their donations of people that were like paying monthly by PayPal. But luckily that had quite a limited impact on me. So yeah, I didn't mind that too much. Really, my main gripe with GitHub sponsors is that it's very difficult to communicate back to those that sponsor you. You can send out like newsletters or updates from the GitHub sponsors panel to those that have sponsored you, but I believe that they have to tick when they sign up that they're happy to receive those. And that is to like everyone, or I think maybe you can filter that down to everyone in the tier. But it's very difficult just to send a quick thanks to everyone that signs up, especially where it's maybe been like a company sponsored tier where I need to communicate with them to maybe show their logo and they haven't got back to me. I'd have to then cycle through their website to get their email address or try and find it from their GitHub account. It's good from a privacy perspective that they're not just giving you their emails, but it would be nice to have an in-platform way just to be able to like send them a one-off message of thanks. Then the other gripe is that it's very much connected to GitHub and therefore Microsoft. And as someone that's trying to move away from GitHub to Codeberg, as shown earlier, this kind of keeps me on GitHub to some degree and it keeps me attached. What I'll eventually do, because I will move the main project repository over at some time, I'll probably just still have it there as a mirror anyway, and then still accept donations from here. As a general rule, you may want to think about diversifying those. If you're relying on donations as an income, then having all of your eggs in one basket in one platform that's heavily going towards AI everything, whatever your views are, having them in one place is a risk to that if you're living off of your donations. And then my other method is Ko-fi, which is again linked to me personally. I use this for not just BookStack, but for multiple projects for the same reasons that I said earlier. And I think this is nice to have alongside GitHub sponsors, or just, having an alternative here, because GitHub sponsors is very kind of code centric. For a project like BookStack, my audience isn't solely focused on developers. So many of those people might not have a GitHub account. So having just a kind of more generic looking donation focused alternative provides a much nicer entry route for a lot of those people. So we can see here we got one-time donations and memberships, and these are paid via either PayPal or via, shows card here, but that's essentially via Stripe. You end up kind of setting up your own Stripe account for this. And in the case of Ko-fi here, this is totally free for the one-time donations. I should mention GitHub sponsors is also free. They don't take a fee out of those donations at all. And that's regardless of the one-time or the subscription donations. So for Ko-fi here, there's no fee at all for the one-time. But I can't remember exactly for sure if PayPal and Stripe take their fees out of that. I think they might do. But then on the membership side of things, I think there is a small fee from Ko-fi. I can't remember exactly what it is, but yeah, there is a fee for those recurring payments, which kind of seems fair enough for me. They're providing a service and they've got there's more work with those recurring memberships. There is an option to always support Ko-fi. I think it was something like a 5%, but I don't bother with that because I'm thinking I've got quite a few, memberships, so Ko-fi are still getting some fair money. And if anything, it kind of feels a bit guilty to me to then start moving the funds of people donating to me to Ko-fi. I don't know, I'd rather kind of forward those on to other open source projects. But I have got those company tiers set up. So if I have a look at all tiers, you can see these are in pounds, not in dollars. So the amounts don't exactly align, and I'm not checking on the currency conversion too often. But it's the same kind of thing. It's a little bit more awkward because I can't make that an actual link. But yeah, it's generally the same setup tiers that I've got here. But overall, I quite like Ko-fi a bit better. It feels a bit more friendly as a platform. This is quite nice that you can have kind of this feed for engagement. And engagement is good in general. So every time that someone donates, it sends an alert to me via email, and then I can jump in and provide a response like you're seeing here. You can have a bit of back and forth. They can leave a message. It's much more personal in that level, and I really quite like that. It is a little bit more effort in terms of management because, in my case, I've got to then manage this via PayPal and via Stripe, and then provide exports and reports through those platforms to consider in my own financial accounts. But it's not a massive deal in my view, and overall I'm quite pleased with Ko-fi as a platform for receiving donations. And now I thought I'd finish up on a visualization of my donations. So what you're seeing here is a complete view of my sponsorships and donations for the year of 2024. And each of the colors here represents a donator or sponsor, and then each of the squares is an individual donation or sponsorship. So for example, in this one here, this is a single sponsor that has sponsored at £500 per month. So there's 12 blocks in here, one for each month of the year. And in my case, most people do sponsor monthly, which is why we see these kind of split down blocks, although sometimes I do get annual sponsorships as well, like this one here, this 1200. But I think this provides quite an interesting picture in terms of the breakdown of the level of donations that come in, especially from the lower end, the one-offs, the monthlies. Because you can see here, there's a massive portion of these are from those reoccurring monthly sponsorships. Now, these are really, all of these ones here are going to be those company level tiers, both through Ko-fi and GitHub. Now, so if you're really trying to kind of optimize, at least in my context, because all these details are really context sensitive. If you're really trying to optimize of gain of these, then that's what I'd want to focus on really, because those are what kind of provide a reoccurring stable base where if you're looking to be sustainable based off of donations only, then you really need a good foundation of that, and these provide a solid foundation. But as you look down into this corner, there's still a lot of smaller donations, especially a lot of smaller recurring ones, and then you have a lot of one-offs as well. Part of me, when I look at this, I kind of almost feel bad for those smaller donators. They're giving a little bit of money, it is a drop in the ocean compared to a lot of this, but it's all very kind and generous, and it all adds up to something much bigger. All these little ones do add up, and still, even if it's a £3 or a £1 donation, that's still like a snack paid for or a drink paid for, part of my food shop covered. It all means so much, and it's incredible that I'm able to get even just this amount through sponsorship and donations, even though it wouldn't be a massive salary on its own. I think it's absolutely incredible and generous from a community that I have, that I'm able to get to this amount that we can currently see on the screen. But one of the main things that I wanted to show this for is to encourage people to not be shy in putting options for those higher amounts. So don't worry about putting up these values. When especially putting up that £500 a month one, I thought that's a ridiculous amount of money that no one's really going to go for. But then, of course, people do go for it. If it's an option there, people might go for it. And I'm very grateful for that. In fact, this sponsor here has been sponsoring me for many years at this point at the highest tier. And they even said that they don't want their logo to show up. They're just happy to support me. So yeah, don't be afraid to put on those higher amounts there, because people may go for them. So that covers just about everything that I've got to say about the sponsorships of my projects. I do have a blog post here about how I think I've gained a lot of my larger sponsors, because the reality is I think it's quite random when it comes down to exactly why people might have donated to me. Some of them were existing connections, some of them were companies where it may benefit to have their logo on some of those higher sponsor tiers. But ultimately, whatever has their decision to provide that sponsorship, you need to have that community base there for your project and those sponsorship options to be discovered. And sorry if I've drummed that in a bit too much, but I think that's just such an important element to note, that you do have to think about that social side. It's not just a technical endeavor. Otherwise, I hope this provides some insight and some thoughts to have in terms of how you're thinking about doing your own sponsorships, or how you're managing your existing sponsorships and donations options. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I really do enjoy helping out other open source maintainers, because I know it can be quite difficult, and it can often feel quite lonely as well in the world of open source maintenance as a kind of maintainer going by yourself, especially as a lot of the content that I see is from massive organizations like Red Hat or Canonical or the Linux Foundations, where they have a full community meetup groups and things like that, where they can discuss a lot of these things. So if you're out there just trying to graft it by yourself, just feel free to give me a shout and I'll try and help you, at least within the insight that I can provide based on my experience. But you can find me in other places by going to my website danb.me, and from there you can find where I'm at on Mastodon. And I've also got my LinkedIn there, but I probably won't respond on LinkedIn because I never really visit it. But that's everything for this video, so hopefully this has provided some insight and this has helped you out. But other than that, have a wonderful day.